Welcome again to the Doomer Optimism podcast. Today we have a very cool conversation planned with Chris Jagger and Viktor Zaunders. I want to kind of set out a little bit of the context for this conversation. So I don't usually promote my own tweets on a podcast, but I think it's relevant here because I think this conversation arose out of a tweet that I had that both of you guys responded to, saying that you wanted to talk. And I was like, well, if both of you respond to that, why don't we just have a podcast, right? Because I think this is a very important issue. And that's really kind of local regenerative food system distribution, right? So in Doomer Optimism, we often have a lot of podcasts about homesteading or farming, but we don't have that many on kind of the, what happens after the farm part of it, and how do you connect customers to farmers and make it a viable food system. So I'm going to go ahead and read this quote, and then I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. So the quote is, low-key, some interesting innovations on the distribution side of local food systems, from CSAs and food hubs to marketing cooperatives and the revival of farmers markets. I'm hopeful that a lot of the coordinating infrastructure is in place to eventually compete with Big Ag. Okay, so with that kind of context, Chris, why don't you start? Just kind of give me a sense of your background, especially with regards to food systems.
Sure. Yeah. So I started my farming journey in the late 90s in Santa Cruz. After working in Alaska in the fishing industry for a season, I ended up in Santa Cruz. I'd been curious about food systems for a while. I had a friend who was really actively involved in Food Not Bombs. And so I helped with that a couple times, dumpster diving, getting food outside of backside of grocery stores just to feed people in the Bay Area. And I had this kind of awakening as far as, well, I'm good with using waste food, but also can we produce food? I was young, I was probably 23 at the time, just trying to see where I could go with it, and moved to Santa Cruz, started working on farms there, met my now wife there at the same time. She was studying agroecology at the UC there. We both were involved with the homeless garden project there a bit, then worked on some other farms, and then everybody at that time frame, mid 90s, late 90s, started looking into interning on farms because it seemed like the right way to go. She and I both ended up interning on farms in Colorado. And we're on that farm. She was on one farm, I was on another farm, 20 miles away from each other. Did a full season of that, and then got invited back a year later to manage the farm in Colorado, the vegetable side of the farm in Colorado. That farm in Colorado was called Guidestone, and they were doing a raw milk dairy, and they were doing a herd share program of a raw milk dairy at that time, because raw milk was illegal in Colorado at that time to sell direct. But they came up with a system where people would buy the herd and then reap the benefits of that herd. And so Melanie and I were the gardeners for their 5-acre CSA. But the whole farm itself was a big CSA program. And so it was raw milk, vegetables, all the meats. We had beef, goat milk, sheep, chickens, turkeys. It was kind of like that early on, the full diet CSA program. We supplied to mostly people based out of the Denver and Boulder area, mostly affluent folks that were supporting it. But it was about 500 families, I believe, at the time. So that really spawned my interest in the food systems at that time. She and I also were really actively involved in permaculture at that time. We ended up taking our permaculture design course up at with Jerome Ozentowski up at it's like a high elevation permaculture design center. I think he's still there. It was him and Peter Bain, who was the editor for Permaculture Activist at the time, and then this other guy, John Cruikshank, who has passed away since, and he was actually tied in with the farm in Colorado that we were working at. So we did that for 2 years, running the garden system there. And then we ended up moving to Oregon. Mainly we were going to farm in Colorado, but that year that we went over to the western slope of Colorado was where we were looking to land in Cortez, Durango area. And that was the year that the reservoir was empty. And so we said, well, it's going to be challenging to farm here if there's no water, even though the land prices were pretty reasonable. We ended up moving out to Oregon and linked up with a guy who was doing a goat dairy out here, and decided to help him for a while we're looking for land, and found finally the piece of land that would be our homestead. And my wife's parents were really supportive of what we were doing. They did put the down payment on the land for us, which we're eternally grateful for that. And we started basically at zero, doing a multi-diverse vegetable operation. We started with the CSA concept is what we thought we were going to make our living doing. 100 members, $500 for a year, 50,000 a year, no problem. We're going to do this for the next 40 years, easy. And then we quickly started learning about what it was like to do a CSA farm here in Southern Oregon, where I live, which is a very kind of remote region. There's not a huge urban center here. And so we quickly moved into starting to do farmers markets. So we started that farm. We started in, it was 2004 was our first year of farming. And then our last year farming actively was 2021, kind of on the backside of the pandemic. So that kind of brought us up to today. And we've done everything from CSAs, the classic CSA, hybrid CSAs, wholesale sales to grocery stores, co-ops, restaurants. We've dealt with regional distributors, and we started at 0 acres and worked up. The maximum acreage we ever farmed was 40 acres. And then when we were finished farming, we were back down to around 12 to 15 acres. So I've seen the whole gamut of running a diversified vegetable operation from 0 to mid-scale and back down again. And it's something I'm really passionate about still, of course, but there's a lot to be learned from what I've seen over the last 25 years.
Yeah, well, before we move on to you, Viktor, why did you guys decide to get out? And do you want to just briefly describe kind of the direction you're going in now with the media stuff?
Yeah, sure. So the region that I'm in here in Southern Oregon, it's somewhat remote. Our closest metropolitan area is Medford, which is about 80,000 people. Really, labor came down to be our biggest hurdle. And a lot of the marketplaces kind of saw a decline. Like the farmers markets were still really good, but a lot of the restaurants were having a hard time on the backside of COVID surviving, and that was a marketplace for us. We were also up against a lot of the retail outlets. We're really up against the California effect. A lot of being so close to California, the organic produce that was available coming out of California is a day or two old, honestly, once it gets up here. So it was always hard to compete with that. So a lot of retail outlets would not really want to be supportive of the small farms always. It was more of a greenwashing situation where it'd be like, well, we'll buy a little bit. So we were challenged with that. And then also my kids are almost to high school age now. My one boy is in high school. So we also wanted to move into town and offer them a good high school to go to. So we've now handed, my farm is being rented by the people that were my farm managers previously, and they're doing their own enterprise here, using all of the infrastructure that I've built out. And that works really good as a handing off model to the next generation. They're focusing on seeds for the organic seed industry and some fresh veg as well. And so now the big question for me is, I don't want to walk away from agriculture. So what can I do to help help keep it going forward. And so I'm been working on just building this idea of a new media company, probably around podcasting or something like that, to really hear the stories of farmers and people that support the greater farming industry and kind of how that's developing in a 2023 world. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Nice. Well, I just want to offer, as you're building out your media company, if you want at the beginning to use the Doomer Optimism platform to say interview people, just to kind of get running.
Yeah,
it's available. I already like you, so
awesome.
You have that invitation. That's actually how Doomer Optimism started as well. We started podcasting podcasting on a different platform called the Stoa, and then we decided to make it our own podcast. So just throwing that out there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Viktor, tell us your story.
Right. Well, thanks, Chris. It was great to get a full background on all that. So I a bit different. I used to be very much a tech guy. I grew up as a technologist, loved computers and stuff, and was in my early 20s done with university and started working as a IT business consultant kind of thing, but didn't last very long in that setting, and wound my way somehow into a permaculture design course with Richard Perkins, who's a really prominent designer over here and a really good educator.
Where is over here?
Sorry, I'm in Sweden. I live in southern Sweden. I live in a village of about 1,000 people. So after I got into permaculture and really was blown away by the amount of things I hadn't thought about or seen before, or the kind of approaches to systems that I didn't have before that. Got really excited about fungi. I think it's something about the network kind of patterns that really drew me in, because that's something that I was already working with. After that, we had a kid, me and my partner, and wanted to move out of the city. We're living in a few different cities here in Sweden, and then found this place, a village about an hour outside of Malmö, which is our closest city, close to Copenhagen. And basically I started hobbyist farming a little bit, or like gardening and planting trees, and doing a bunch of mushroom farming here just in the yard. And then a couple of years ago, an opportunity arose to take over some space in the village. And we ended up starting just around COVID, we ended up starting a microgreens and mushroom farm. And basically what I'd been doing the years leading up to that is I'd been working on trying to build tools for local food distribution. So we helped me and a couple of other people start designing this thing called local food nodes, which were basically a kind of pre-sale farmers market where everything was organized beforehand, and then everybody met up at a certain time and place, and we just handed over all of the goods. It was like a 15-minute thing. So farmers kind of went around to a bunch of those in the night. There was a similar thing happening on Facebook. So that was like the parallel to what we were doing, but just on a very different, messy process. So I tried doing that with our mushrooms and stuff, and found that to be really hard, actually, to spend all of my afternoons and evenings just going around, because we now have 2 kids, and afternoons and evenings are not when you want to be away, or when I wanted to be away. So we've been trying a bunch of different things with the mushrooms. It's a fairly small operation still. I haven't made my full living through the mushrooms very much. I mostly have done other things like consulting things and stuff on the side in order to supplement that. But we've tried. I've also done about a year. I did a project of exploring food co-ops in Sweden. So we went around to interview all the ones we could find, basically, and map them out and do like a handbook based on all of the experience of different models for food co-ops and buyers clubs and that kind of thing. And I'm super excited about that model. We've started a buyers club in our village where basically the way we run it is that we do once a month, we do an order from a bunch of local producers and some regional and distributors as well. And basically one person in the association is responsible for one producer, or like we get to, somebody's excited about some producer and they pull them in and then they handle that relationship basically, which I find is a really nice model. So I'm exploring that, and now I'm also moving in more to, I'm working with this framework called Holochain and building applications in a distributed manner. And I'm really excited to build some of the things I've been wanting for a long time for our food co-op on that, so that we can start using that internally, and then also see how that model fits for others, because I know a lot of co-ops around here that I know are also looking for support in their processes. So yeah, and so I'm also involved in like starting an eco village kind of thing here, where we would have a larger production site, and so there's a couple of different threads on like scale and stuff, but basically I've been a small to mid mushroom farmer, and I'm really excited to figure out how to do, like who does what in getting people the food they want, because I think there's a large role for people that are actively supporting and interested in their food to help farmers actually take care of all that admin and logistics so farmers get to farm. I mean, that's what I've also felt, that like probably 70% of my time as a mushroom farmer has been spent on trying to distribute the stuff, which is a lot of skill that is not necessarily something that the people that love farming have, in my experience.
Right.
Yeah, so maybe that's
Do you want to talk a little bit more about what Holochain is and what you think that can enable for food cooperatives and food systems in general?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the reason I got really excited about Holochain when I found it a couple of years ago and got into that community was the idea that you can create a space for a group that is kind of like a generic space, or like the way we talk about it now, sometimes it's like it's surface area for a group to bind things onto. And what we can do then is to create a sort of module for collective purchasing, for instance, that could be added to groups that are already doing other things. So once you've kind of set up your group with this with Holochain as the base, then you can add on collective purchasing. So anything like a school or a church or whatever group that's already doing stuff can just start handling that function as well, if the facilities are there for it and stuff. And just maybe more basic, so Holochain is basically a framework that allows our computers to talk to each other peer-to-peer without there being any sort of central servers and stuff, and you don't need any organizations that are middle men for the applications. Kind of, you just I just download an application and run it, and I find other peers, and then we can just coordinate as we please. And it's also a possibility, like since there is no one network or anything like that you have to coordinate with, you can experiment with your group and make changes to the software the way you want it, and if it turns out well, you can just share that with other groups. So it's it supports a lot of evolution, I think, in group behavior. That's one of the most exciting things to me about moving on to distributed infrastructures.
Nice. I want to just note or mention, by the way, that you guys are also free to ask questions of each other. So if you want to jump in at some point, I don't want to dominate the questions because both of you have more experience than me, and so I want to give you guys the opportunity to do that. I'll just throw out real quick. So I'm curious if in either of your kind of areas, so here in Western North Carolina, it seems that the model that is pretty rapidly growing, besides we have CSAs and farmers markets, but the model that seems to be growing are food hubs. We have one in my town. I think there's at least a dozen now in Western North Carolina alone. And basically the idea there is that you have a piece of software that, it's kind of like an Amazon shopping cart where you go on to the website and you get all the different farmers' products. I fill out my cart, as a customer on, by Monday of the week. And then, everybody's collective orders goes to the farmers. The farmers, it aggregates it into their specific, their specific farm, and they see, okay, I need to bring whatever it is, 20 cabbages and 40 bottles of kimchi and whatever else, right, to the food hub on Wednesday. The food hub is just basically like, a meeting place. But it, with that software, it kind of coordinates, farmers come once a week to bring their stuff and customers come once a week to get their stuff. I'm just curious, I'm always fascinated how culture and landscape helps to determine what models eventually get used. And I'm wondering, I know like here in Western North Carolina, it's very hilly. It basically, the landscape enforces kind of small scale farms. And, I think as you were saying, Victor, it's very difficult for an individual farmer to spend, to market their product, besides like go to farmers markets, just because they're so small and they have to spend their time on the farm. And so this seems to be a way that's evolving here to solve that problem. Of course, the downside of it in my mind is that you don't really have the convivial aspect. It's very efficient, but it's not like a farmer's market where you're actually meeting each other and getting to know each other. You pull up in your car, you get your stuff and you go. And so that's the downside of that model for me. I'm just curious if either of you guys have thoughts on that model. If you've seen that model where you are. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so several things to unpack there from what you said. I think that the food hub model is probably something that's going to work now that we have technology at the level that it is. I think even 10 years ago, it wasn't there, but now where we can make those administrative tasks be automated by software, I think we're at that point where that can start being a possible solution. I think that always the challenge with like when we were doing CSA was the administrative side. It's kind of like what Victor said too, was like you're spending your time doing all these details. Now, if that can be automated through software, I think that we're going to see that might become the dominant way to distribute food, because of the downsides that we've seen to CSA over the last 20 years, which are, at least in America, it's that people want selection, whether that's the right way to be or not. That's just how it is that people want to choose what they want. Which we found that when we first started doing CSA, we were like, this is the way it is. And here you go, people, you're paying up front, you're getting this box of produce each week. But we also had a lot of turnover every year with our customer base. And eventually we went to a model where we did a CSA program that was called Market Bucks, where we still had people pay up front at the beginning of the year. So we had that working capital at the beginning of the year, but then we just gave them cards that were basically like business size cards that were each worth $50 each. So we, like, if you paid for a full share, you would get 10 of those cards, and then they would only pay $425 for those $500 worth of produce. So that was your value add right there. And then they would come to the market and just shop for whatever they wanted. That started working really well for us. And that was like a real key for us of like, oh, people really do want this selection. So now we get into this food hub model. I think that's my friends that are farmers around the country that I've asked about the food hub model. That's what all of them are saying too, is that people really like that selection. They also like being able to, the ease of ordering online and just going there and picking it up. They also said that a lot of the folks that do pick up at the food hub to get their box for the week, they also see them at the farmers market for that community connection. So that's something else that I think that we always should keep in mind, is that I don't think there's ever going to be one model of distribution to rule them all. I think we should always have these diversified models of distribution, just so you can fill people's needs in different ways. And I think that that's kind of the direction we're going with this more decentralized mindset that we were wanting to fall into, is that's kind of how you can find those niches in your life, is to fill those out. The food hub model overall, I think it's kind of like you were saying, as far as landscape, I think it really depends on where you are in the country as well. The most successful models I know of have been in really large urban areas, because you just have the sheer numbers to work with. And then it's usually, if you have sheer numbers to work with, then you are able to find the funding, however that is, through grants or investment or whatever, but to find the funding it takes to actually build that food hub center out. We've tried that here in our region of Southern Oregon, and it's really difficult because we just don't have the population base to support it. And so many people here grow their own gardens, their own personal gardens. So that makes it a challenge as well. But I'm hopeful with the direction that software is going. I think it's really matured a lot, to the point that I think it's going to really relinquish the need to pay humans to take care of, or as many humans as it's needed in the past. I mean, I'm pro-human, but at the same time, we're working with real tight margins here. So we have to look at where we can use tools to our advantage. So.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
I want to give you a chance, Viktor. Just one more note on that. So a couple of weeks ago, I talked with a director of one of these regional food hubs, and he was at a point, and it's interesting because this is also a very rural region, and for some reason they're making it work, and I want to figure out why. But he was saying that they've been doing pretty well. I mean, they're a nonprofit, their structure is nonprofit, but they're making a lot of, their revenue share of, donation share has been steadily increasing. Like, they're doing pretty well. And the thing that he's trying to figure out is, I need to kind of expand these facilities to basically, scale this out a little bit. And, but that requires financing. And, he's wondering if, going to the kind of traditional financial system, can I do that without kind of selling my soul, right? Because of course the traditional financial system doesn't value many aspects of local and regenerative agriculture, right? These are not financial values that they're providing, right? Their community, cultural values, their ecological values, their health values, et cetera. And so he's kind of at this inflection point where he's trying to figure out, doing pretty well, but how do we keep going? So yeah, just thought I mentioned that. It just came to my mind. Viktor, go for it.
Right. So I think the food hub model is what we're doing basically, and it's a lot of what I've been seeing around here also, in different forms. And to me, it's like, and I mean, our little buyers club in the village, our food hub is a really small one actually. We're about 20 families right now. So it's actually like we would need for the producers that we support to be able to make a living properly, there would need to be more of them around. But it's like the 20 people are just in our village, and there's about 1,000 people in our village, so there could probably be a few more that's gonna join eventually. I'm hoping. But since we are that small, this is based just on the drive that people want to have the kind of food that we're getting, which is not super easy to get around here sometimes at the local store and stuff like that. So basically, it's really important for us actually to make sure that the administrative side of all this gets really, really dealt with by the technology, because that's the stuff that nobody really wants to do. Like people are usually quite all right with like handling the incoming food and like dividing stuff up and stuff like that. But handling like the bookkeeping and like who did the orders or did people pay or like all that kind of stuff is not something that anybody's really excited about most of the time. So that's something that I think will be, I think it's great actually to take that out of the kind of question of like who's going to do what if we can. And there's also a bunch of like I loved hearing about the way you were using those cards because it's something I've been thinking about a lot around credit, and that's also something that I'm super excited about with using Holochain for these kind of applications, because it's it's got like very strong support for things like creating internal credit within groups and also credit within different actors that are connected to the network, because that can be secure credit because it's kind of a cryptographic basis for the things. You can't really cheat in those kind of situations. So I think that what we really need to do in the same way that in the other, because we like our food co-op is also inside of a little co-working space that's there, and there's like an event space, and so it's all kind of mushed into one, which is kind of why there's a lot of people moving in and out of it. And I think that like possibility of mixing different contexts is really something that makes this stronger. And one thing that I've realized in the other context is like if we're trying to make decision making and administration and stuff as simple as possible, then what we can do is free up some time to dedicate to make sure that we have that conviviality. So you adjourn or you make sure that you have times when people come in that are basically just for the conviviality and to make sure that we know each other and build relationship. And with food, of course, it's like people do want to see what all the food is like and talk to the people that produce it, and like that's an important thing. So we've had a few times had like market days and stuff like that where we kind of meet at our local restaurant is also really good at that, at finding people and bringing them in and having like a day where people get to stay outside the restaurant and show what they have. And I think that that's super important to keep and to for people to see what's happening and get into it and build relationships with the people, because a lot of times they don't meet them when we're delivering through the food hub. So I really think that that is important. I think that that's, without that, I don't think that we'll have a strong, like the relationships make it. Otherwise, I don't think it's going to. It's so easy to fall back on just going to the supermarket if you're in that kind of flow already. If you don't feel like I'm getting something special out of this relationship, and like that kind of, it is the food that I want, and I know it's the food that I want because I know the people that grow it and I know how they grow it and that kind of stuff. So I think that that's a crucial part. And another thing that I hope that these food hubs will do is to be like a, and that's also could be connected to credit, but be like a launching pad for new enterprises that have, like, once you have enough, something that I'm really excited to build is to build a kind of registry of, once you have a couple of food hubs around that are all using the same software, or at least compatible software, then creating the kind of registries where people that are inclined to farm regeneratively or stuff like that get to sign up and be kind of validated by the other co-ops and farmers and stuff, so that you can kind of have the customers really early on, and maybe even get like a crowdfunding situation going or something for people to start, or that kind of stuff. That would be super excited to me to see. I mean, I'd love to do that with mushrooms, to get more mushroom farmers on, because I would love to stay at the kind of one and a half person operation and have lots of those, because it's kind of, especially mushrooms are really well suited for that, because it's a small floor space kind of thing. So yeah.
So just to clarify, because I find this interesting, so you were talking at the end about kind of a farmer to farmer peer kind of evaluation, where like if your other farmer friends, they see your operation, they're like, okay, this person is legit, then they're invited into the network, and that's kind of like almost a replacement for, say, organic certification or something, right? Because I know the complaint about these kind of national certification schemes is that they're like inflexible and they're maybe easily greenwashed as well. And so is that kind of what you're kind of proposing there? Is this kind of more peer-to-peer kind of certification system that customers can kind of believe in?
Yeah,
Mhm.
basically. And I think, I mean, that can go, it can be farmers that validate other farmers. It can be like you know, the consumers that can come out and visit the farms and validate that they've been there and seen this or that. Or it could be I mean, I think that there is a role actually for some sort of consultancy thing that can also, especially in the case of farmers looking for investment, that can kind of validate whether or not the practices you are contributing, like soil scientists or people that work water retention or that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
so that you can kind of get that validation to make sure that when investment goes, or when investment comes for ecological function, if that happens, and I think it might,
Mhm.
then you have the kind of robust and like, if that is done for that reason, then that can also be just shown as something that validated by this specific peer or institution or whatever that you can use within the other relationship. So I'm really excited about that idea of having visible validations. I mean, this is in the Holochain places is currencies, basically. That wider definition of what seeing flows.
Nice. Well, let's talk a little bit about kind of the financing side of this. You know, there's a whole movement afoot, and I think you kind of alluded to a little bit, Viktor, of kind of regenerative finance, right? Regen Network is one that I'm, you know, most familiar with. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on it. You know, I find it interesting. I also have certain reservations and skepticisms about it, about trying to monetize. You know, the idea in my mind is you're trying to define other forms of capital, right? Not just financial capital in the strict sense, but also ecological capital and social capital. And why do you want to do that? It's because then it can be kind of properly valued in some kind of financial system, you know, transformed financial system. You know, the reservation that I have about it is, well, one, that the system can be gamed in various ways. Another is that it can encourage bad behavior, like we sometimes see with, you know, news stories about carbon credits, you know, kind of providing an indulgence for companies to keep polluting, kind of thing. Also, you know, if you're putting everything in kind of a spreadsheet or an immutable ledger on a blockchain, you're quantifying everything, you know, that also might internally kind of corrupt the intrinsic qualitative value of it in various ways. And so those are some hesitations I have. And I've talked to Gregory, who's co-founder of Regen Network, who basically wants to get, you know, finance into like regenerative stewards, farmers, and, you know, landscape stewards' hands to be able to do their work. And he has really, you know, good responses to all of my skepticisms. And he, you know, some of the things he suggests are I think along the lines of what you were mentioning, Viktor. But I want to kind of get both your general sense about finance in general, you know, as well as this kind of, if you're familiar with it, regenerative finance.
Well,
so go for it.
I can speak to how we ran our farm over the years. We definitely were a pay-as-you-go farm. We rarely took out loans on anything. I think the first time we took a loan out was when we needed to buy a refrigerated truck because we were moving into the wholesale realm. And that was one of those situations where no bank at that point would give us a loan. And so I hit my mom up actually, and she was a retired school teacher. So it's not like she was flush with money, but at the same time, she built a loan out for us for that. That was the first thing that we really ever took a loan out on. And I mean, other than our mortgage. But it's something that I always thought about over the years because it really gave us the flexibility to not be tied down to anything. So the best story that illustrates that is once we started growing for a regional wholesaler, we were selling to them. We were selling as many cases of chard and kale as we could send to them in a week. There was no limit, like as many as we could harvest. And we're talking 300 to 500 cases a week. A case is 24 bunches. So you can see, I mean, we're talking some volume of grains. We did that for 2.5 seasons. And then halfway through that, the second season, or the third season, one of the biggest outlets for them said, well, why are we paying all these Northwest farmers $2 a box more when we could just be getting all of the same produce out of California for $2 less? Because there was somebody at the corporate head, it was like one of the big grocery chains. And so in one day, we went from selling as many cases as we could to 0. And that affected probably a half dozen other farmers that were in the same deal. A couple of the other farmers were completely leveraged. They had a bunch of loans out to make sure that their operating costs could be covered. So they were forced to figure out where they were going to sell all that produce, because now they had no outlet for it. And so they definitely, a couple of them did okay, a couple of them didn't. Luckily for us, we're not leveraged at all. And so we had the ability, we just went ahead and tilled it all under, I mean, it was nutrient back into the soil is the way we look at it. It was a bummer, but it was nice because we didn't lose our shirt over that. So that was one of those good lessons for us of like the moments of not being leveraged. And so for me going forward, I always tried to figure out how could I build my financing into my price that I was selling my product. And that was something that I tried to bring up these new and alternative ideas to our co-ops, and they were just not really into it as much as, because it was kind of out there. But my concept that I always thought was, if you can get a customer base that will say in the beginning, they're going to pay $3 a unit, let's call it a bunch of carrots, just to keep it simple, $3 for a bunch of carrots, while I'm trying to figure out my systems and trying to get my systems down, and I have extra, but it only cost me $1 to produce that carrot. I've got $2 of margin that I can work with to go towards equipment to scale it up to a proper level. And I can learn that equipment too. That's something people don't realize, that it takes a farmer some time to learn that equipment, with the goal being that eventually I want to start bringing my prices down, because as long as I'm still covering my costs and making a little bit, I'm okay. And so there's that. So if I could eventually get to $2 or $1.75 for a bunch instead of $3, that extra money I look at as like a kitty that the money can go into to help cover the cost of that equipment. And I then think about that expanding out into an entire community of farmers and consumers. And it's kind of like what Viktor was saying with the software and the currency model is, can the consumer agree to pay more in the beginning for a beginning farmer in that network? And that extra money goes into this bank of sorts to help cover those costs. And then you have other farmers that have been established within that same community for years, and they're already operating at the lower level of cost because they've already gotten to the point where they're efficient. So you're not looking at, well, that farmer's making more than me. You're just looking at like, I'm more efficient now, so I'm actually making I'm making the margin that I need to survive. I've just started thinking about systems like that we're not going to a bank or a financial institution or a private lender to ask for this money that then we're paying this extra percentage. We're basically paying as you go, and the consumer is paying that, but they're also under the understanding and agreement that over time, we're going to see it get cheaper and cheaper. And the big question for me always is, at what scale do we have to operate for this to actually work? Because if it's 2 farms or 3 farms, it doesn't work very well. But if it's 15 or 20 farms, it might work. Or if it's 10 people or 20 people, maybe it doesn't work. But does it work at 1,000 people? I don't know. That's something that I've been really brainstorming about. And that's something that I'm really curious going forward, is finding what that holding capacity for a community. There's a term for it, and I don't know what it is, but a collective of sorts. But that community module, what is that proper scale that it needs to operate at for some of these systems to work? That has its advantages and disadvantages, but it also allows us to be a little bit more free from these private equity or public equity institutions that have basically created the issue of where we're at. And the other thing I'd say to that too is that a lot of those private equity and bank institutions, they just don't understand that we're up against nature here as well, and so that's the community behind you, is that you can create that narrative around, we're going to have some good years, we're going to have some bad years, but hopefully with the collective of farmers, it's not going to be a complete loss,
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of my initial thoughts on financing, because I do get nervous whenever it's like, oh yeah, we'll just take out a $500,000 loan at 6, 7, 8, 9%. That's a lot.
Yeah. Viktor, you want to run?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is a really big topic for me. I before I fell into permaculture, I fell into money and like what money is and how it works and all that kind of stuff. And I've been digging in that. That's how I found Holochain also, like through the metacurrency stuff. And like I really like Gregory and Regen Network and all the stuff. I've been following what they're doing for a long time, and for me, it's a really like he to me seems like a very, very, very pragmatic person that's been doing regenerative farming for a long time, and realizing that it is like that threshold of acquiring land to me is like one of the biggest things. Like it's either we find some sort of process in which there is voluntary or some sort of forced movement of people into land stewardship that aren't currently in land stewardship, or there is some sort of capital way of achieving capital fluency and fluidity so that we can purchase land that is degraded and that can be regenerated and that kind of stuff. And to me, it feels like that is kind of where I see Regen Network being like a really major player in kind of figuring out ways for people to get that are skilled and committed and just want to farm regeneratively to get onto a piece of land, and to do that through financial mechanisms that enable things like things like land trusts and stuff like that as well, but that are backed. The productive capacity gets backed in different ways, and that's one of the most interesting parts of it to me. Is what I really want to get into in the coming years is asset-backed currencies that are backed by actual production, so backed by mushrooms, backed by that kind of thing, that are where you can invest in, because I know that I'll want to eat different types of food throughout my life. So if I invest and have faith in the credits I invest in that can be redeemed at a later date, then investing at a discount is a great way to spend my money, because it's not only am I getting a discount, but it's also, especially right now when there's so much inflation and that kind of stuff, this becomes like, well, I have the rights to 100 pounds of mushrooms. I mean, that's going to be good to eat through and if the prices go up, I can still redeem it for my mushrooms. That's so it's like, and I think that model goes for a lot of different things. We're looking at that for housing and the eco village, of like you can pre-purchase square meters of rent, and then whatever happens to the pricing, you've still got that rent that you can redeem it for. So I think that and then what I'm hoping is that this may actually be the bridge of moving from the kind of totally baseless money layer, which is just or it's not baseless, it's based on how much can people lend, like how much fractional reserve can we push so that we get more money spinning. That's the basis for all that. But can we base money instead on regenerative process like that, where you have products that are contributing to the places they are produced in, that are backing the actual currency that's circulating. And I think that what they're doing is really with eco credits and stuff like that is pioneering that kind of work. So I'm really excited about that. I think much of what we what I would like to see is moving towards a model where we don't do as much quantification and like fungibility and that kind of thing around products, realizing that, you know, they come out of unique environments, and that we go more towards some sort of access model where you don't maybe purchase food all that much, but you're basically becoming some sort of member or part of a commons that supply food, and you have access to that food because you supply something to the commons, which is basically like a more intricate way of doing gift cultures and stuff like that on bigger scales. I mean, that's where I would love to go towards, but as you know, becoming more pragmatic as I get older and less idealistic, maybe after having kids and all that, I feel like it's pretty good to experiment with those things, keeping in mind the danger of letting capital in, so to speak, like the possibility of getting, especially ownership of a lot of stuff. Like that's why I really like co-ops. I've started several co-ops, and I love the idea of being able to continue steering, even though you're getting things like loans and stuff like that, and because you don't have that ownership, that like ownership over the process in the same way that you usually do with corporations and stuff like that. So that I think, like, and that I really enjoy watching that evolve in like how people can invest money without actually getting ownership over processes, but instead getting some sort of asset that is redeemable in the future. And I can't say that I have a clear picture of the steps that Regen Network is going to take, but I'm very curious to see, because I know, like, just looking at what they're supporting, I'm getting really excited about the people and projects that get that money, that get funneled in through all of their credit work.
So Victor, are you saying that at some point in our MetaMask we might have like kale coins and potato coins and stuff like that? I mean, is that the direction that we could go with a lot of this?
I mean, for me, it would be really easy, at least thinking like with the software that we're building or with the software that's emerging in the Holochain ecosystem, because a lot of that is about mutual credit, and there's like energy credits, and there's all sorts of, the whole project's been built by this company called Holo, which issued hosting credits as the first thing that they did so that they could have money to build the whole service. And I think that it's really simple, actually, for me to, if there is enough faith in people to, in my operation, I could issue credits and people could just buy them for mushrooms. And as long as we find agreements, I think that's going to be very interesting to see, like making basket currencies, for instance, of like, so that there is some fungibility between credits locally, at least. Yeah, I think we could easily see going that route of people seeing what productive capacity they have and offering up for the future, for people that see the value in supporting that, because it also makes, like, we've created this kind of money that is good for getting small pieces, or like stuff, like generic stuff, and there's so much stuff in the world. So if we can make money that's based on the more produce there is, the more money there is, I think that pattern is actually quite powerful to get to use that kind of modality of choice and optionality that people get from using credit, but basing it on something that is actually, you know, generative to the ecosystems.
I'm very curious to dig more into this issue of fungibility versus non-fungibility. I think this is pretty core. It kind of, like, you know, at least the financial question, right, where we moved basically to completely kind of fungible economic system. You know, money can buy this, can buy that. Of course, it doesn't incorporate much of the negative externalities, you know, associated with it. And so this idea that you're basing money on real assets according to the values that we hold regarding ecological stewardship, food security and things is fascinating. And you mentioned, Viktor, that you know, you'd want to see like there'd be some fungibility still. Like in my simplistic kind of formulation here, it's like, okay, I have a soil carbon credit, and I have a potato credit, and I have a kale credit, and I can trade these credits with other folks, and you know, they can even be interchanged, you know. But I guess I'm thinking in terms of like reinforcing feedback loops, and if there would be like what kind of you know, frictions would you need to introduce to not just, you know, reinvent money as we know it today, right? You know, would there be some kind of push or pull towards just complete, you know, fungibility again, and externalization, you know, of externalities? I don't know if that question makes sense.
No, yeah, I think it does. I mean, to me, I think this is definitely, it's definitely a, I don't know if I'd call it a fear, but it's definitely a concern that is really clear in my mind of like actually letting that kind of specter of you know, basically extractive process in to whatever system you're doing, because there is all that. I mean, people that are currently have a lot of money right now are totally wanting to use that to buy really, like, they also want to buy really nice regenerative product. The people that don't have money also want that. And I think it's really it's an experimentation to me. I think it will be interesting to see like how far do we want to go, like, because it's a lot of it is like how much can you create. I really like there's this book called Free, Fair and Alive by David Bollier in the commonings kind of movement, and they talk about this idea of provisioning quite a lot, and like creating parallel spaces that are more market based, and then spaces that are non-market based, where you actually come to agreement within a group of how to divide things, and then maybe you use some monetary currencies and stuff in order to acquire what you need for that group. But then within that group, it is no longer a market mechanism that divides that stuff. And using those kind of like spaces to start building commons where fungibility isn't like things don't move in and out of that membrane so easily. I think that's really interesting for experimentation. I'd love to, like, that's something that there's like a vegetable community garden thing happening in the village. That's not going to be like, people aren't going to buy their food there. They're just going to be a membrane, and you spend some time there and you grow things, and that's not going to be a market-based thing. But there might be things like, you instead of spending time there, you might spend time taking care of the kids so that other people can spend time there, and like those kind of things might be as valid as of an input as the actual, you know, weeding or whatever the other work will be. And that would be, to me, something where it's not like those tasks wouldn't be fungible with like putting in $50, you know. It's not that it's not that full correlation. And I'm hoping that that's something that we can experiment a lot more with, like being really clear about, is this a market facilitated space or not, and building out the commons where we can, and then allowing for it, because we all have needs of national currency. Like we all have things like taxes and you know, rent, and we have a lot of electricity bills right now, like that, all that kind of stuff. You know, you're stuck in that unless you really find some way of getting land and off gridding and doing that kind of stuff. But that's for most people pretty hard to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Chris, I'm curious if you have kind of how you're taking this conversation with Viktor is talking about, because it seems like what you're describing, Chris, is kind of like this endogenous internal generation of finance, or even thinking of in terms of like the customer is kind of financing, like pre-financing the farmer, right? By maybe paying a little bit more because they know that the farmer is like, you know, still refining their processes. I'm curious kind of how you're, you know, like how you're interpreting and thinking about what Viktor is talking about, and do you see it as, you know, as useful or maybe non-applicable to how you're thinking about things?
Oh, I think that what he's saying is spot on. And the way that I look at it is I always work with things in a non-linear fashion. So I'm never like, oh, here I've come up with a solution, I'm going to stick with this solution now. For me, it's more of like a kind of what Viktor's saying is a solution that will work at some point, but we have to work to get to that point because, you know, there's a lot of resistance by the zeitgeist to accept cryptocurrency at this point. I mean, I don't want to just throw it all into the world of crypto, but it is kind of that concept. And so in the meantime, that's what I've always been stuck with my farming too, is like, well, I want to get to this point where I'm fully sustainable, blah, 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 all that stuff. But in the meantime, I need to raise my family and I need to pay my bills and all this stuff. So I would look at most things as a hybrid solution. So kind of what I'm saying is like, in the meantime, we can use kind of what I'm saying as we start to implement some of these new ideas. Because honestly, once we get into the world of the Holochain and all that kind of stuff, it is a completely different shift of the mindset, especially for people that are non-technical. Like I've just seen how long it takes for the common person to adopt that. Does that mean 20 years? No, not necessarily. Maybe 3 to 7 years or something like that. But in the meantime, I'd love to use these other old methodologies. And that's how I'm always thinking, is like, do I see a lot of problems with our current, you know, system that we have? Yeah, there's a ton, but how can I hack that current system to make it work? Because all we're really trying to do is come up with a way to better our experience with our other humans. That's my main goal, is like, I'm not trying to win, you know, I'm just trying to better my experience with others. So it's like, so I just do that all the time. Like, in the meantime, let's do this, and let's look at these new ideas that are out there, and how can we be open to them. So because I mean, I brought up the idea of blockchain as a way to be used within our distribution system for the regional distributor that I was working with. I was like, in the future, this is going to make complete sense, because you can follow that cabbage from the time it's planted as a seed all the way to the person's dinner plate if you want. And there can be a immutable ledger that tells the story of that vegetable, you know. And I was in a board meeting explaining this whole idea once I understood the possibility, and it was cricket chirps, you know, like nobody had any idea what I was talking about. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm at on all of that right now.
Right. And Holochain is kind of a rebellion against blockchain too, right?
Right.
Because
right.
the danger of having everything on a mutable ledger is, is the police state, basically, right?
Yeah.
Viktor, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah. I mean, for sure. And that's like having these membranes, as we usually talk about them, and like you don't get to see things unless you're invited into the space where things are visible, and they might be very open for some things, but for some things they definitely won't be. And it's something that came up for me when you were speaking, is like, I was listening to Toby Hemingway a couple of years ago. He did a presentation called Liberation Permaculture, I think it was, and he'd just been reading Seeing Like a State and those books, and like that really, I think that idea of legibility is really key going forward, because I really like the thought of having legibility for enough things that we get to navigate the world that we're living in ways that work, but then maintaining some sort of seclusion, or at least the privacy around what you're doing with the rest of your, like, I think not everything should go on the books, and I am really intrigued by the idea of being able to collaborate without having it be fully public to everybody, because it is kind of like, I mean, the whole thing of blockchains being trustless is trust destruction in a way. Like it doesn't make it possible for us to have delicate and nuanced things happen if there is no safety around our relationship and conversation and whatever's happening. So I think that is super important to be able to do things that aren't exposed in that way, and at the same time being able to have accountability within that group. I think that's what I am really excited about with the tech that Holochain has been building, because that's kind of that possibility of, I mean, once you're in the membrane, you can see everything kind of, or a lot of the time. I mean, you can do different things there as well, but that's a very different view than having it completely open to all of these outside actors, which I live in Sweden. We have a very strong state in a way, for good and bad, and it is we are almost cashless at this point, which is a little bit terrifying to me, where it's like I feel that possibility of having a sort of fluidity and privacy around what's happening is actually really, really fundamental for us to be able to relate to each other. And it's also just like, cash has zero costs of transaction. It's like there's a cost to maintaining the cash supply, but it's whenever you use all these systems, there's somebody somewhere that needs to be cut in on something a lot of the time. So it's I'm definitely hesitant about a lot of those things.
I think it's beautiful though that you're already onto this other system. Like blockchain itself isn't even fully adopted by very many people, honestly, in the world. And yet it's cool that there's these evolving systems like what you're saying with Holochain that's already a step ahead of what's not even adopted yet. I think that's awesome that we have these new, like, the human condition is always looking 2 to 3 steps ahead. It just depends on which periphery you're checking for all that. So and that's the thing, is like, as you guys were saying this, I didn't even fully understand the full evolution of what you're saying that this is going to be for something like Holochain. I didn't even understand that it had this like membrane that you were talking about, but now it's starting to click for me. And I was like, oh yeah, I can see it. It's great to see like we're evolving simultaneously past, while most people here in America, you say blockchain and they still have no idea what you're talking about. They might not understand Bitcoin or something like that, just from a catchphrase. And yet there's these groups of us that are already years ahead. I think that's great. So
I just want to clarify something on my own mind. Viktor, maybe you can help. So there seems to be an analogy here between kind of this membrane of privacy or intimacy, and then outside of that, you're more legible. And then what you're talking about before of like this necessity to interact on a market occasionally, and so that requires some fungibility. And it seems like there's an analogy between fungibility and being more open. And there's an analogy between non-fungibility and being more private and having these nested membranes. Does that make sense, that kind of comparison?
I think so, to some degree at least. I can see being able to handle. If I'm thinking of things like, there's a whole world of like NFTs, and like the Vinay Gupta is doing a lot of things around like putting unique things onto blockchains and stuff. And there is kind of like that. I don't see that necessarily correlates, but I think it's much easier. It's hard. It's fascinating actually, like how valuations of NFTs and stuff like that happen, because it's such a weird space to me. Like how do you decide how many of these fungible dollars are assigned to this picture and not that picture? And it's like it's a very fluid kind of weird thing. whereas inside of a membrane, I think you can still, I would be totally easy. I mean, if I was selling mushroom credits, they'd be mushrooms, you know, wouldn't be like the specific batch of today or something like that. So I don't know if they're necessarily linked, but I think it's much easier to not fall into like having to compete. I mean, to me, like you wouldn't be with the kind of small scale, locally produced, all of our substrate is from Sweden, that doesn't have to be competing with like European sources that are like real big factories that come from somewhere else, and they're a lot cheaper than what we produce because of creating the kind of membrane first of like people care that they are from here and that this is kind of capacity that we have, so that might carry on whatever happens around us and that kind of thing. So it's more of that. Embodying or being able to platform a value, to have like, this is a value that we care about, and we can put that inside of a membrane. Like the membrane can be valued, whereas the open space is hard to do that often. Yeah, I think that's where I'm at.
So I want to ask, this is for both of you. What are, in terms of kind of where you're wanting things to evolve, what are the biggest bottlenecks? Like what are the things that we really need to figure out, we really need to work on to kind of take the next evolutionary step?
Just with local food systems in general, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and competing, you know, so the idea with, you know, regenerative local food systems is eventually, the idea, I think, is that, you know, it will replace the industrial global food system model, which is, you know, destroying, the planet, the planet's ecology, biodiversity, soil, etc., as well as hauling out local communities. And so seeing this as kind of, you know, an alternative that is still facing a lot of challenges in this environment, and maybe the conditions will change where there will be a very rapid, you know, increase. And so I guess in current conditions right now, and, you know, we're still largely, you know, part of a, you know, global capitalist economy. You know, we're still largely in a, you know, at least in the United States, a corrupt political system that's, you know, dominated by money. And, you know, local farmers who are trying to do right by the land, you know, face a lot of headwinds, right? And so we're trying to figure out, you know, how we can cooperate to compete, so to speak, right? And so I'm just curious, like what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing right now for the farmers in particular, or kind of local regenerative food systems in general?
Well, I talking with several farmers around the country. I've kind of reached out to a bunch of people in the last couple of weeks just to see where things are at. And really, it's kind of like a positive note is when COVID happened, a lot of these systems fell into place really quickly and they worked really well. And then as we saw the madness go away and people got back into their old patterns again, then most of those systems dwindled and most people shut them down. That sucks because the farmers couldn't continue with what they were doing. But it also is great to see how fast they could move into that sort of action and people responded. If there was a more drastic collapse, I don't know if it would be the same, but I mean, I think that was a pretty drastic scenario. I mean, we shifted our distribution system from farmers markets to online sales and then home delivery in a period of 2 weeks, you know? So that's one thing that's promising, I guess. And I think that if things ever got really weird, it would come down to how are we going to accomplish the work that needs to be done? Because if fuel and all that is not as readily available, we're going to have to go towards people power again, you know, more. And so that's the other thing. The biggest hang up that I see right now for farmers is labor. I mean, that's across the board. There's just not the labor available. And whenever I say labor, I'm talking on people that are working on maybe a bigger scale than a small like community garden situation. And that's something that I'm always really interested in, because it's like, well, what scale should we be operating at right now? Because it isn't realistic to say like the area that I live in, let's say there's 200,000 people here. Well, it's not realistic to say there's going to be 20,000 people farming within the next 5 years. I don't think that's realistic. Should there be? Yeah, there probably should be, but is there? No. And so it's like, what is the proper scale for a community-based farm to operate at? And I don't know what that is. That's something that I am really always tapping into and trying to figure out. That's probably the biggest thing. I mean, I'm starting to look at robotics for other farmers. Like, does that make any sort of sense for the future, and replacing people weeding in the fields with robots? There's some really cool stuff happening right now. I know that you're beholden to the technology then, but I don't know. That's really where things are at right now, is getting the work done. Because even if you have 100 people that are interested in farming in your area, those 100 people, how much effect do they have on the overall food system? Those are all questions to be had.
Viktor?
Yeah, thank you. Like from what I'm experiencing in our tiny business, in a way, compared to a lot of other things, is that at least here people have been a little bit less like money is tight in a way, like as the energy costs gone up, because in especially in Sweden and Europe, the electricity costs have skyrocketed quite a bit. So most people around here are like, their month costs every month are like up some 30% or something, just from the energy prices, and that makes it harder to rely on people's kind of more idealistic kind of wanting to support, but they're not feeling that they can afford it, in a way. But really, I think that the biggest hurdle is actually people's understanding of health, in a way. I think that because to me, that's what I've seen as the biggest pathway for. I mean, we might be a little bit of a special case, because mushrooms is kind of the people that know about mushrooms are usually people that are really into, like, studying the body, and a lot of people mushrooms are just a weird thing that doesn't really matter. But I think that idea of understanding that healthy soil produces healthy food, produces healthy bodies, is really, like, so that you can understand that I will live longer and not have the same kind of health issues and problems if I eat well. And that is kind of a very big driving force, I think, for a lot of people to actually find the food that will make them healthy. And that I think is actually a pretty healthy way of looking at, like, why support your local farm, because I want that health, because it's kind of like, if I can be healthy, then my community can be healthy, and then the whole region can be healthy. Like, it's a good place to start. And I think that kind of education around those kind of things has been lacking. I mean, we've lived through I don't know, almost a century now of chemical farming that totally undermined that whole idea of living systems, and we're now really coming in to understand things like microbiome and what that does to us, and so I think that like education around what does your food do to you is actually maybe the thing that's most missing. And that's really great to hear, Chris, about what you're doing with the podcasting and stuff, and highlighting farmers and soil and that kind of stuff. I think is crucial for people to understand that their own health and their families and their kids and all that is going to be supported by making sure that there are people around them that farm in a way that supports health in general. So I think that's probably what's going to get people most excited and supportive, in my mind. But yeah, I mean, working in a, and also that thing of like you were saying, labor, and then maybe like a lot of the hybrid models that have worked before, like CSAs, where people come out and help and do things like that, and might get to work again. I mean, that's also a thing of like how stressed people are, their workload, and like how much time can you actually give to your producers and that kind of stuff. But infrastructure for that would also be like mixing the whole thing of credits and work might be actually quite useful. I mean, I really love the idea, like the Japanese, when they've had a lot of issues with their currency for a long time, and they started the Furei Kipu, which is like I go to a family close to me to care for an elderly, and my elderlies that live somewhere else get care from someone else. So it's like a parallel system to the national currency based healthcare system. And something like that could also be possible, where it's like I do something in the city for someone, and somebody else in the countryside goes and helps out at a farm, and somehow that gets tallied and sorted out. And I think interesting experiments like that I would love to see, because there are a lot of people that actually could spend time doing some of the work, but maybe not where the work needs to be done.
I found it fascinating that Chris, you were talking, the thing that I heard that you emphasize the most is lack of labor, and so that seems to be kind of based on a mentality that, you know, in a country where like 1% to 2% I think of the population is involved in farming, and that just seems like the status quo, and farming for many people seems like a low status kind of profession. But of course, if we want smaller scale farms, agricultural farms, we're going to need a lot more farmers, and so there definitely has to be a mind shift around, you know, around that, and around kind of, you know, the prestige of farming in the right way. And then to your point, Viktor, you know, it seemed like what you were focusing on the most is like knowledge and the paradigm around health, and around kind of these embedded systems of the gut biome and the soil and everything else. And it seems like kind of what we're talking about here is a bit of a paradigm change from both sides. And of course, they're both kind of connected, because if you're more concerned with your health and food, but maybe you can't afford to, you know, get all of your food from the local farmer, then you might start your own garden, right? And then that might get you into production, right? And then you're also a food producer. And so there could be a lot of synergies here. So that's just an observation. So I think we'll wrap up pretty soon, but I want to give both of you a final platform to anything that you think that we haven't addressed enough, or haven't addressed that you think is important to emphasize. So like kind of any, you know, if a question that you think should have been asked, or you'd like to further elaborate on something you've already mentioned, I want to give both of you, you know, final platform and do that.
Man, there's a lot. I mean, I think the thing that I would say closing is that I think that these kind of conversations are really the most beneficial thing that we can be doing right now as a culture. And the fact that, I mean, the amount of miles between the three of us is pretty amazing, that we are able to exchange information. And I just don't take it lightly of how strong this kind of interaction really is. And so I really feel like it's something that I've tweeted out recently quite often, is like, I keep working on people of like, where are the real conversations happening? You know, like where is that salon mindset of yesteryear, where everybody would get together and just talk about stuff, instead of just trying to gain following and go viral and all of that, which I understand why people want to do that. But I'm a big advocate for small groups. And that's really what's driving me to go into this podcast realm too, is the one-on-one or 1-on-5, you know, group discussion. And that I think a lot of synergy comes out of those kind of situations. So I would say that's really all I want to see, is this kind of conversation keep happening with small focus groups of people. And I also find then these situations are the least toxic interactions between humans. There's something to that. There's something we can gain. Like, I'm answering my own question here is like, what scale should we be operating at? You know, farming. Well, what scale should we be operating at? Coming up with brainstorms and ideas around these solutions too. So that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, I just always appreciate the platforms just to chat with others.
Yeah, just want to just add something to that. I find it endlessly fascinating that I agree with you. Like these kind of small group conversations are vital, and often, you know, a lot of what we're talking about are these localized, you know, localization, local systems, but equally vital to these is to have these small group conversations that are distributed, you know,
Yeah.
around the world, right? So it's kind of like this, you know, the term I use for it is cosmo-localism, or I didn't invent that term, you know, a lot of people use that term, you know, where we are, you know, learning from each other, right, and experimenting in our own context, and then, you know, learning things and then sharing that knowledge that other people can adapt in their context. And, you know, I think that's a beautiful thing. I don't know if the internet, you know, due to various biophysical factors, will be around forever. You know, that's a whole conversation. But while it is, I think it's something that we really need to, you know, emphasize, like leverage, you know, right now. So I just wanted to kind of add that thought.
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Victor?
Yeah, what came up now when you were speaking is the I work with Nora Bateson, who's also been on your podcast, and like that idea of like, because we're so stuck in our ways of doing our scripts and our thinking and our mind, and like figuring out ways to work together better is like the maybe even below all of the stuff that we've been talking about. To me, like that idea of who we are and what's a group and what's me, and how do I learn, and understanding that we learn all the time, and that we are always in relationship with others as we, you know, do things. Because my experience in the last 5-6 years doing things locally is that the hardest thing to do is like convivial cooperation in a way. Like it's really easy for projects to start, but then once you kind of, the honeymoon kind of phase is kind of over, then it's really easy to get into, you know, back and forth and personal issues and like these things that tend to slow things down and eventually halt a lot of projects. And I think that like learning to change our ways in how we relate to other people, and to be able to grow with other people, and be open to learning at a totally different kind of frequency, like becoming people that understand that we learn all the time, and that everybody learns, and that there's not somebody who has all the like answers to how we're supposed to do things, that we're supposed to find them and figure out what they've said, but like being much more responsive to the like how did we end up where we are in a way, or what is it that is actually keeps us doing what we're doing, and being able to see that. I think those things are really important, and to me, like a lot of the time I like get into a project, and then after a while I realize, okay, this is probably not working because of our relationships, and not so much that we're not doing the right way or the right model or the right thing. It's like, how do we understand ourselves in relationship and learning is like, yeah, it's so ingrained in our having grown up in schools and all that, like how we are have learned to see authority and yeah, all that stuff. So for me, that's like it's a missing piece, but it's also something that's really hard to bring into a conversation like this, because it's such a, yeah, it turns everything into mushy stuff.
Yeah. Well, in the spirit of you know, continuing the relationship and the conversation, I'd love to have you guys back on in the future. I think there's just so many more topics around this that can be discussed and explored, and perhaps also, you know, bringing in one or two others as well. I think food systems in general is probably my primary focus. And so just the more that we can kind of bring people in and have these conversations, the better. And so I'd love to have another episode at some point down the road. And if you guys, can think of anybody who would really be a good fit for this kind of, relationship and dialogue, please let me know and we can set something up. I think it'd be great.
Sounds
Sure,
great.
I love that, and I'm really grateful for being on. I'd love Doomropolis. It's really, yeah, I love the melding of different people and different conversations. It's a really wide and flowy place. I love it.
Nice, thanks. Yeah, that's what we're trying to cultivate, and so glad when I'm glad when people experience it that way. That makes me happy. Well, all right. Any last words? Any just thing that's at the kind of tip of your tongue that you just want to get out real quick before we hit end?
I'm good to go.
We're good.
Yeah, no, thanks. I'm great.
All right.
Thanks for
Take care, guys.
being here. All right.
See ya.
See ya.